Good evening. Welcome to the October 8th, 2024 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may attend this City Council meeting in person or may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV and at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call and raising your hand during the public hearing. When your name is called in the meeting, you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. Second item on the agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask everyone who is able to please stand and follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item is the roll call. Let the record reflect that all members of the council are present, except for Councilmember Parkhill. Right. Earlier this evening, the council participated in a workshop where we reviewed the following two items. We had updates to the capital improvement plan for 2025 through 2033, and we also reviewed the draft cannabis-related zoning ordinance amendments. Next item is to approve the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as is? Or would anyone care to make any changes? Yeah.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. To approve the agenda as is? All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And our next item is the public forum. As a reminder for those members of the public in attendance this evening, if you are interested in speaking, please state your name, address, indicate if you are representing a group. We also ask that you limit your comment to 3 minutes. If the item you wish to speak about is something that is on the agenda, for those that are in person, we ask that you please fill out a form located on the table in the back of the room and hand it to staff. For those that are watching via Zoom, please send a note via chat to staff and let them know which agenda item you wish to speak about. We will also require that your camera is turned on when you speak. City Manager, do we have any forms that are filled out for the public forum this evening?
Madam Mayor, we do not, and we do not have anybody on Zoom as well.
All right, very good. We do have one item that was listed on the published agenda for the public forum, and that is introduction of our new employee, Aaron St. Cyr. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you. Accountant, City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Deputy City Manager Yeager is going to take this. I'll just say that given our size, given the type of community we are, it's important to acknowledge our wonderful employees, especially our new ones, that see all of our community members in whatever position they're doing. So this is a tradition that we love. We can really showcase our wonderful staff.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our newest accountant. Her name is Erin St. Cyr. She joined the city in May, and she actually joined what was a new position. We previously only had one person in our finance department, so we were very, very happy to add a second one to our midst. Erin comes with a lot of public finance experience. She came to us from the state auditor's office, and I can already tell you that in the time that she's been here, she fits in with the team really well. She's a super hard worker, a very quick learner, and she has a great sense of humor too. So I can say that our team loves having her, and it's great to have the added capacity, especially at a time with, as you may remember, our senior accountant retired at the end of last month after 31 years. And so graciously, Erin has really stepped up and taken on some additional duties and is learning a lot. And I can honestly say that I don't know where we would be without her. So I'm very happy to have her on our team, and welcome, Erin.
Hello, I'm Erin St. Cyr, and again, I started in May.
absolutely love working for the city. It's very different from I worked at the state auditor's office in the government information division for 12 years. Prior to that, I worked in private sector for a family business, St. Louis Park. I've really enjoyed it's been a very fast learning experience, jumping into a new position and then all of a sudden learning Kathy's job as well. So absolutely love all the employees that I work with and love the experience.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Any questions? No? Well, it is a pleasure to have you and have very big shoes to fill with, as we know, with Kathy leaving us after 31 years, but heard nothing but absolutely amazing things about your skill set and having you on the team. So thank you so much for all that you do, for making us run so smoothly and getting all the bills paid on time and and everybody gets paid. You know, that's important too. So we really appreciate having you and look forward to many years here at the City of Wayzata. Thank you. All right. Any other forums for us this evening
No other forms, Madam Mayor.
for the public forum? No?
Up. Madam Mayor, we do have one, but this is for an agenda item, so I'll pass it
Okay.
along just to keep in mind for the new business items.
Very good. Okay, so we'll move along. Item number 6 on the agenda is new agenda items. This is an opportunity for the council to bring up any items that they would like to talk about at a future council meeting. Anything? No? All right, then we will move on to item number 7, which is our consent agenda. This evening, we have a few items. We have approval of the City Council workshop and regular meeting minutes of September 17, 2024, approval of the check register, approval of municipal licenses, approval of local climate action grant agreement with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, approval of Great River Greening Cooperative Agreement for the Wayzata Nature Center Restoration Project, receipt of 2024 second quarter financial report, approval of letter of agreement with Kent Good Road Piano for the volunteer appreciation dinner, adoption of resolution 41-2024, approving the 2025 Wayzata City Council meeting schedule, and approval of amendment to professional services agreement for financial services with Abdo Financial Solutions for 2025. Members of the council, do any of you have any questions about any of the consent agenda items or wish to pull an item for separate discussion?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to pull item 7D, approval of local climate action grant agreement with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for separate discussion and vote.
Okay. Then any concerns or any other items that we'd like to pull?
Madam Mayor, I would like to make a comment and maybe even a request to staff regarding item E.
Okay.
I just, I do plan to vote in favor of it, and so I'm fine with it staying on the consent agenda. I just thought it should, maybe it's more discussion or a little bit of nuance with it, but I have a few comments I'd like to make on that item.
Okay. Very good. Let's see if there are any other items. All right, so nothing from Councilmember Sorensen. Very good. Why don't we go ahead and let's pull item D. We'll put it to the end of the agenda. All right. Sorry, I'm just making some notes so I don't forget. Right, so we'll talk about that after item 8B under new business. And then, Councilmember, would you like to ask your questions about E or make your comments?
Yes, if you don't mind, thank you. I just wanted to, I had spoken to the city manager about the cooperative agreement for the Wayzata Nature Center Restoration Project, and I wanted to just make it noted to the public that this is an initiative to restore the nature preserve, and that it's kind of separate from any initiatives via parks and trails or any sort of development. And that's why I support this item, but I also wanted to make a request that the public be notified of what's going on in the nature preserve, and also keep the council looped in on what the plans are in this restoration, just so that we have many eyes on this situation. I think it's an important piece of property that is preserving nature, and I hope that it would stay that way.
Oh, thank you. I think it's I think it's great that we're tackling this. We ask our residents to, and encourage them to take care of invasive species, and that's what we're tackling here. So I do think it's good. It is not part of a larger initiative at all. It is simply to try and take back some of what nature is trying to take over, and not the nature that, like the buckthorn and things like that, that we want in a place like the Nature Center. I do like the idea of maybe some signage somewhere. I know it's tucked away in kind of in the back there to promote the work that we're going to be doing, that the city is undertaking, the removal of invasive species, but also communicating very clearly and succinctly with the neighbors, as we do know that when buckthorn is removed, it can have a vastly different look and feel to the area, and some of that privacy that people enjoy from having that type of vegetation. Once it's removed, it can feel stark. So I think that's a good suggestion for communication. Anything else on those items? No? The one item, kind of a comment, city manager and I spoke about this earlier today, is with regard to item I, and talking a little bit about the services that are provided by ABDO. I would like to see us start taking some of these tasks on in-house, given the skill set. We just met Ms. St. Cyr and her abilities. We have new financial software that we get to a point where we can start taking on some of the tasks that ABDO's doing, like the quarterly financial statements. And so let's start, now that we have the tools and the skills, taking that in-house for some of those things. Okay, seeing that there are no other questions or comments for the items on the consent agenda, may I have a motion to approve items A through C and E through I?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion passes. I will take us on to new business. And let's see, we have 3 items now under new business. The first item is to consider adoption of ordinance 842, approving a moratorium on redevelopment in the R3A district. City manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our wonderful assistant planner, Val Quarles, is going to tackle this one.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Council. Tonight we'll be considering adoption of Ordinance 842, approving moratorium on redevelopment in the R3A district. For some background, there have been concerns raised from the Council and from the community about the fast pace and character overall of single-family redevelopment in some of our core neighborhoods. When I say core neighborhoods, the areas of concern appear to be north of Wayzata Boulevard, east of Berry, south of Highway 12, and west of Gleason Creek. A council workshop was held on the subject on September 17th, and the direction that came out of that was that staff were directed to prepare a moratorium on redevelopment in this area for the council's consideration this evening. The moratorium is in your packet, and the applicability is always the biggest question with the moratorium. The area subject to the moratorium is outlined. That's those central core neighborhood sort of area of concern that was primarily discussed at that council workshop. The moratorium would be set for 90 days from the effective date of the ordinance. I mention that because as an emergency ordinance, if we had a 4 out of 5 vote from council, that would be an emergency ordinance and it would be effective immediately. If it were to pass on a regular 3 out of 5 vote, then it would be treated like any other ordinance and we would have a second reading at the next council meeting and that would delay the effective date. The activities prohibited by the moratorium include no new demolitions, no new home permits, and no additions. The moratorium is designed to give staff some time to look at potential code changes within the R3A district as a whole. We don't differentiate this area from the rest of the R3A district, which in that call-out image below is most of the area in orange and includes a lot of Central Avenue, south of Wayzata Boulevard, that whole neighborhood. So while we're focusing on a lot of the redevelopment activity that's happening on the north side, the changes would likely apply to the rest of the R3A district. Our next steps, regardless of whether the moratorium passes or not, are that we would hold a planning commission workshop to discuss the issue. Staff is already working on potential zoning solutions to the concerns around neighborhood character that were raised in that workshop, like homes being far forward or dominated by garages, impervious surface, all of the things that were talked about within that workshop. We would also be looking at creating an engagement plan for both residents of these neighborhoods and the developers that build in these neighborhoods, understanding whether, are we putting together solutions that seem really great on paper but aren't feasible for builders, and would not be used. And then, like any other zoning code amendment process, we would be bringing that through the public process with Planning Commission, ultimately to City Council, and we would be doing that before the moratorium ends, so over that 90-day period. And again, that's based on council direction, that's the plan regardless of whether there's a moratorium. It just changes whether there's that pressure of additional demolitions or new home permits happening at the same time or not. And then the community's role in next steps is that we do intend to have engagement around this issue. It's important. It's specifically about character, which is something that we can try to understand as staff and have a technical understanding of, but we want to hear from the people who live here and work here and build here. So that'll be the role of the community within this process as well. So the proposed motion will be to adopt the moratorium.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Quarles. Questions of staff?
I just have one.
Yes.
So when was the last time we had a moratorium on development of this nature?
I would have to look. I don't have the answer to that question.
Yeah, Councilmember Sorensen, I did have a chance to talk to another colleague about that question earlier today, and we didn't have a chance to go through all of the archives, but aside from the cannabis moratorium, no other moratorium came up over the past 8.5 years.
We've had moratoriums, for sure.
Right, but not recent, is my point.
I
We
thought
could recall
had
the-
some, we'll have to go to the city attorney, because I remember moratoriums like in my tenure over the last 10 years. But if you ask me, for what? We had the
Yes,
telecommunications
Madam Mayor.
moratorium. I'm trying to think if there was anything else.
That's the one that, Madam Mayor, and Council, that's the one that came to mind that's been in, recent memory was the one on the cellular, when we did the cellular tower. I think there was I seem to remember we might have had one imposed in connection with zoning like this, but I don't remember exactly
Yeah.
when. During my tenure, but not within recent years.
But we can go back and take a look at that.
Yeah.
Get back to you.
Excellent.
Okay, thank
Other
you.
questions? No? My question is surrounding impact to those who may be in process, right? Applications that have been submitted. Can we talk a little bit about that? How many applications do we have that are in that area that are deemed complete, and also those that are not deemed complete?
Sure, Madam Mayor, and I think City Manager Dahl might have a couple of numbers on this, but there's a couple of stages of permit issuance, I think is kind of key here. So there's the moment we receive that permit, and then there's all of the evaluation as to whether we have enough information on that permit. When it comes to demolition permits specifically, there's a lot of site inspection that has to happen before a permit is formally issued. And then there's also a little bit of a gray area between giving sort of the green light for a permit and the applicant paying for that permit. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a gap as well. So we have a few permits in process right now. If City Manager Dahl wants to list, maybe, I don't know if we want to give specific addresses, but we can talk about the types.
Yeah, just in general, within the smaller area, not just in R3A, but just the smaller area where the moratorium is proposed, we have essentially a few single-family home permits that are under review right now.
When you say a few, is that one or two, or?
Well, two for sure, and one that's actually been approved, but we're waiting on payment, so that's kind of pending.
Two are under review, one we're awaiting payment. So if this moratorium passes tonight, does that mean that person does not have the ability to move forward with their project?
Well, I'm looking at the city attorney here, but my assumption, just like any zoning review, when you're reviewing the permit, if you don't have zoning approval, then the permit doesn't get approved. And because a moratorium, if that is enacted tonight in an emergency way, they wouldn't have zoning approval, so we wouldn't issue the permit. But I defer to the city attorney if he has anything else to add.
No, Madam Mayor and City Manager, that's essentially correct. So the moratorium would essentially freeze those, if they haven't actually been issued a permit, if they haven't received their permit, either because they don't have a complete application, review is pending, or they haven't paid the fee, that would be put on hold for 90 days under this moratorium.
And then are they aware that this was pending and this could potentially impact their applications or the issuance of a permit?
I don't know specifically if these individual folks were made aware of this or not.
I think part of the discussion there is that our pace of evaluation and reviewing doesn't change all of that much. We can't really speed it up and we can't really slow it down. So the existence of a potential moratorium either tonight or in 2 weeks or not at all doesn't really impact the pace at which either we evaluate or they get their fees paid or they finally, have shovels hit the ground. So that's part of that there as well.
How long have we been waiting for this payment? And I ask because if I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. If I have, I get a phone call from Ms. Quarles and she's like, oh, everything looks great, you just have to pay. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of busy this week, maybe I'll stop by next week. If, however, I knew that if you don't get your payment in before Tuesday night and this emergency moratorium happens, you're now delayed for 90 days and all my contractors get bumped, and
Yeah.
then I'm going to approach it very differently.
Yeah, great point, Madam Mayor. All to say to that is, we just got an update that the permit had been approved today or within the past couple of days, so it's all very new. And so we could, after this meeting, let them know that there's, depending on what happens, that there's probably more a sense of urgency. If the moratorium passes tonight, but the emergency doesn't, then there's still a little bit of room for them to get paid. But if it passes tonight, technically they don't have a permit, and then they would be affected by the moratorium, as the city attorney had mentioned.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Just to clarify or make sure that we're precise on this, my understanding from what you said earlier was that to have an emergency moratorium go into effect would require 4 out of 5 council members. We're missing one tonight, so all 4 of us would have to vote in favor for the emergency to go into effect. But if 3 out of the 4 here tonight only approved the moratorium, it would be its normal process, which would take some period of time. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, City Attorney?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, the only nuance I would give to that, just a procedural one, under our charter, we actually need 2 votes for an emergency ordinance. So the first vote you would ask for is to declare the preamble of the ordinance, which outlines what this is an emergency. So I think if you have four votes for that, then this will potentially become effective immediately, because you have to have 2 votes for an emergency ordinance to have immediate effect under the charter. So just procedurally, that's what you'll ask for first.
To declare an emergency? Okay.
And it's basically the preamble of the moratorium, where it says emergency declaration there. You'd ask for,
I don't have a hard copy of that.
oh, I'm sorry, it's,
That's okay.
yeah, page 114 of the packet, I believe.
Okay. Well, we do have one person that would like to speak regarding this item, Mr. Casey Shermack. I'd like to invite you up, please. Good evening.
Good evening, council members and staff. My name is Casey Shermack. I have a home building company called Pillar Homes, and I've been creating homes and developments in Wayzata for 29 years now. I'm also a resident in Wayzata.
And if you could provide your address, please.
That's where I was headed.
Oh,
letting you know that I'm
fantastic.
at 231 Manitoba Avenue South.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you for asking. I'm not 100% if I should be up here. I don't know if that works for me or against me. I'm here as a representative of maybe past experiences that have taken place in Wayzata. I have been involved with 4 mayors to date and about 30 council members and about the same number of commissioners. In many cases, it feels that I'm here, that this feels like a slightly knee-jerk reaction, and that a moratorium to this side of the table is taken very seriously. And if you do decide to do some sort of a moratorium, please state that you're being very serious about it and you're trying to send a message to people on the other side. Because to date, during this process, I have heard staff use some terms that there have been complaints and there's a lengthy list of something that's flawed in the system. The system has been heavily evaluated by your predecessors, and I believe in current time by many of you sitting here. Zoning, code rules, height requirements, water management, hardcover, the immense amount of reviews and codes and zoning that have taken place didn't just happen in a vacuum. These predecessors of yours have all done thorough jobs. The staff that preceded this group of the ones sitting with us today have done a wonderful job. Everybody's done a wonderful job. Something has triggered this. I sat in on a meeting last week for a workshop that I don't believe prior to that there had been any discussion of a moratorium. I also just sat through a request by Councilmember McDonald. It was wonderful that you brought up something about the Nature Center, and your main concern was making sure the public was involved, the public's informed. And there's something going on here within depth with the Nature Center that's important to make sure Mother Nature is taken care of, which the city does a wonderful job at that too. But I talk about this moratorium, and I'm trying to figure out how it got to this level of concern. Being someone on this side of the podium who is in the trenches all the time. I have a bat phone to Valerie. I talk with inspectors daily. I have a bat phone to Jen, and nothing with complaints. I'm just here to say, what can I do to make sure that what I am required to do is a positive outcome for the city of Wayzata? We cannot mandate good architecture or good things, but we have plenty of rules that help us get to a good finish line. And it feels like more incentives should be given for better architecture or better volume in a house or better placement of a garage, as opposed to just putting on the brakes and calling it a moratorium. So really here today, I'm just here to say, people on this side of the podium do take it very seriously, and that word moratorium has a bold statement that comes with it. If you wish to do that, please do it. And state that you're trying to make a bold statement, that there's a bold problem. I just don't see it. And I'm only here as one, but I'm up to 45 single-family permits in the city of Wayzata. And I believe many of those homes fit within this envelope that's been created by yourself, your team, the team that sits there, that works for the city of Wayzata, to make this a wonderful, wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful place to build. It is not easy. Please don't kid yourself that this is an easy place to do that. It's very onerous. But that's not it happens in almost every city. I'm just letting you know that you should take it very, very seriously and put your foot down and say, we're making a statement that a moratorium is the right thing. I would encourage you not to do that. If you want to review, like staff has stated, that there's going to be an ongoing, no matter what happens here tonight with this, the topic at hand for a moratorium, that reviewing, digging depth, trying to find a list that there are problems. I would love to be involved in that. But again, there's not been a ton of public engagement that there's a problem. If there is, let's find it and find some incentives, not just the stopgap that really doesn't, I don't believe, solve anything. In the 90 days, I don't think anything can happen, personally. That's me from being on this side of the podium. I want to thank you immensely for what you do. I want to thank you immensely for how much you care. But I just find it important that playing in the arena of improving the city, which that's what I believe it is, some sort of embetterment to the experience of being in our community and the living side of it, I take very seriously and have a lot of pride doing it. I love being before the city in the past. I look forward to many times in the future. And I just want you to hopefully take what I'm saying to heart, that what you're doing is very exciting for the city of Wayzata. I don't believe it's the positive answer here. I believe there's other ways to get an outcome that would be much more appealing and come across much more engaged with the community, as opposed to, again, I'm not here every single day, but I am engaged, and I do a lot of activity in the city of Wayzata. So thank you for letting me go over 3 minutes or whatever I was required to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Can we talk a little bit about the process and how we've gotten to this point? I think that would be helpful.
Happy to just kind of summarize how we got here, Madam Mayor. The overall concern about new single-family home construction in the Central Core neighborhood, which is the north of Wayzata Boulevard, in the central part of the city, in the R3A district, was brought up at a council meeting a couple months ago, based on how big the homes are, how close they are to the street, and how much of the front yard was consisting of just the garage, and it was really having a pretty significant impact on the integrity of the neighborhood. So that overall concern was brought up to the council a couple months ago. My direction at the time is, if the council agrees on it, let's have this as a workshop item to see, to really kind of walk through the concerns, and then we can talk about next steps. We had that discussion 3 weeks ago, and the direction from the council at that point in time was, yeah, there's some real concerns here. We would like to consider a moratorium that would halt any more construction in that neighborhood for staff, the community, the council, the planning commission to really work through this and try to see if there's any solutions that can resolve the concerns in a fairly short period of time. And here we are today.
Specifically, though, a moratorium can last up to 12 months. An emergency moratorium can last up to 12 months. But council direction was we would support only a very short period of time, and ask staff to really focus. Prioritize the issue.
Yep.
Okay. That was the discussion at the last workshop. All right. Any other questions of staff? No. All right. So I think we clarified we have 2 applications that are in some state of in the process, and one that we're just awaiting payment.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I did have a brief conversation with the city attorney, and one way of dealing with the payment issue is that we could make if the council wanted to move forward with emergency ordinance, there were enough votes and consensus to move forward with that, we could have the effective date tomorrow, so that would give them another day to pay for it if we wanted to allow that.
Effective date at
Tomorrow.
the close of business tomorrow, so they would have time to make.
Yes, Madam Mayor, the ordinance would have immediate effect, but the moratorium would begin at the close of business tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the thought.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. All right, I will bring it back to the council for discussion. Anybody care to share?
Sure.
Yeah. Councilmember Sorensen.
Yeah. Well, I've spent some time walking the neighborhood where we're thinking about imposing a moratorium, and I think I get the issue. I mean, it's a charming neighborhood with significant character, and you can clearly tell some of the new homes have a different look than some of the older homes where the garages are in the back. Most of those are detached. Also quite familiar with other R3 neighborhoods where have been probably equally, maybe even more impacted if you look at the number of new builds in relation to the size of the neighborhood. So I'm very supportive of the study that we're doing because, we always want to try to improve, provide some flexibility to allow our residents and builders and developers to come up with our best solutions. And we made it clear, I think, to staff that we want to prioritize this issue, try to conclude this within 90 days. It looks like the goal is to accomplish the study, do a planning commission session, get public input, come back to planning commission for approval, and then come to the city council for approval in 90 days. It appears a little ambitious.
It is. Yep.
It
It's
is.
very-
So I guess the point is, I think it's not unreasonable to think this is going to be more than a 90-day issue before it gets resolved. And I asked a question about the last time we had a moratorium because this is a significant issue. And it's I think one of the biggest hammers we have as a city council in how we deal with any issues is putting a moratorium in place. I also think this is a bit of a tough nut because I think there's a lot of uncertainty as to what we might conclude through this study. Our ordinance have been here a long time. I think they've been thought out quite well, and they're there for good reasons. So we need to keep that in mind. I mean, I think Val's got a tough job here to help us figure all this out. The declaration in front of us states that there is an immediate, pressing, and emergency need to impose a moratorium. I'm not sure I agree with that. The question is, why do we need a moratorium? We're going to study this issue. We're going to do it in a expeditious manner. And does this issue really rise to the level of really imposing a moratorium and stopping development? And again, I think this isn't a new issue. The things that we're concerned about, and it deals with more area than just the moratorium parameters that we have in front of us. So, to me, again, I'm very supportive of doing what we can to improve our processes now, but it does seem reactive. It seems a little severe and extreme measure given the unclear outcomes that might come of this issue. Sorry about that. And it's something that it's one of the few things we do that has an immediate impact on our residents and our businesses here. And you may say, well, it's only 90 days. It's probably more than that. But if you made an investment to purchase one of these properties, sell one of these properties, invest in one of these properties, given the value of the real estate, and maybe you have plans designed, I mean, the monthly load on that is pretty significant. So, I think from that perspective, I guess we heard from one resident of a similar note. So, I'm very supportive again of continuing to study this issue. I think we can do it without the potential downside of imposing a moratorium. Because I think the real difficulty here is trying to come up with solutions that don't have unintended consequences, including dictating maybe the size of a home or the footprint of a home, jeopardizing our hardcover issues, potentially impacting property values. Those are things that we'll find out through this process. I also think maybe the optics of this doesn't sit all that well, kind of picking and choosing one neighborhood to impose a moratorium on and maybe setting some sort of precedent. So it feels a little heavy-handed to me, and because of that, I'm going to have a difficult time supporting the moratorium.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective. Others?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. This issue and these ideas haven't come from nowhere. As someone who's lived in this neighborhood up there for close to 10 years, it's something that I've seen, as our packet stated, 17 homes being torn down in the last 5 years since 2019? So it's significant. It has been happening. I hear a lot of feedback from it from my neighbors and my little community up there. I really respect Councilmember Sorensen's thoughtfulness of this and weighing out both sides. Now, I think about being conscious of the rights of these people who have put in the time and the investment of their home or their property and what they plan to do with it in the future. But I also look at the person who already has invested and lives there and is having their street and landscape changing so much. So this ball got rolling quicker towards the end. It caught a lot of steam, which I was thrilled about because it's been a drumbeat through the Central Core neighborhood. I also want to note to Mr. Shermack and developers, my hopes in this is actually to look at what our code can do for the imagination of a builder or a developer. Maybe it's too restrictive in some places, which then encourages a different kind of building. So I don't want us to just go into this moratorium with a hammer that's saying we can't allow this or that. I want to look at it and say, okay, we made these determinations in '08, I believe. So that's not that recent to be looking at zoning codes in that neighborhood. With maybe encouraging a better building that would sell better and make the developer more money and make the neighbor's house rise in value. Because I think there are some unintended consequences to our restrictions that are encouraging a certain type of building that I would imagine a builder would rather do something a little more aesthetically pleasing and probably have a higher value. I do realize I'm not a developer, so take that. But that's one thing I wanted to mention is my intentions is to look at it more holistically and how we can make things maybe even easier on a developer instead of just saying no to a certain style, because aesthetics are so subjective. So we received a few letters of support for this. I hope that the council had a moment to read those before the meeting began. I think 90 days is a short time, and it's an ambitious timeline, but I'm glad this has lit this fire to really address some of these issues and look at how we could make our building code better for our residents and our building code better for builders. So,
Thanks. Thank you. Councilmember Plekish.
Well, I appreciate and value what both of my fellow council members have had to say about this. I certainly had no predisposition about where I was going to go with this until we heard all the arguments. I think the most important thing about this issue is how it impacts the neighbors. Am I losing my mic here? Oh, okay. And when a developer comes in and builds a home, they turn it over to the new homeowners, and then they go on to their next project. But the home that was put there affects not only that homeowner, but all the neighbors around them in some way. Now, we have a history in this town that I was even part of, where we could have considered something like this, but we had zoning that we had put in place for all good reason, hardcover requirements, setback requirements, all with good purpose as to what we had intended for that. The unfortunate thing is that sometimes those unintended consequences take a little bit of time to play out. And I think that's what's happening here is those unintended consequences have been playing out, particularly in that neighborhood because it is so compact. When a home is put there that is dramatically different than the other homes surrounding it, it changes the character of the neighborhood. I think we have made mistakes in the past, unintended. They were honest mistakes, but they were mistakes nonetheless. I think we have an opportunity here to correct a mistake before we continue to let it happen. We don't know where this was going to end up, but it is clear that we have some zoning discrepancies, some zoning issues we need to take a look at to make it right. If we are aware of things that could go into place in the next week or two or a few months that we know at the end of this wouldn't match or would meet the new requirements, I think we owe it to ourselves to stop that from happening. As much as I hate moratoriums, in this case, I would be in favor of it because I think we could stop a wrong before it happens. Now, very tactically, we do have apparently one permit that has been approved but not been paid for. Is that correct? Okay. In fairness, I would think in that case, because the developer in that, I don't know who that is, the developer in that case was acting in good faith, and their permit was approved, to then pull it out from under them simply because they haven't written the check yet seems a little bit onerous to me. So I would encourage us to vote for the moratorium, but put it into effect at the close of business tomorrow to give that developer a chance to pay that bill. And then I think 90 days is not a very long time. We're coming up on winter. I don't think a whole lot would happen. Again, I'm not a developer, but I think that gives us an accelerated time to figure this out and then let the process play out. So I would be in favor of an immediate moratorium.
Okay, thank you. I too, just a little bit of background since I lived in that neighborhood back in the mid-90s. So what is that, almost 30 years? Oh, wow. And I too have seen just a staggering amount of change, especially on some of the areas. You know, the lot sizes haven't changed, but the desires for what people are looking for in a home have definitely changed over time. And our zoning was pretty cookie cutter, right? We're going to put it here and do this, and and it doesn't always fit that neatly into a box. And definitely for the last 15, 20 years, we've seen just a considerable amount of change, especially here in the last few years. But some of the issues that Councilmember McDonald had brought up have been issues that have been brought up for a substantial amount of time. And so I'm really pleased that the council was in agreement to explore this issue because it seemed to have fallen on deaf ears with previous councils. And so I think this is a really great opportunity for us to roll up our sleeves, take a look at it, but again, with some very tight parameters, looking at 90 days, understanding that this does have impacts. It has impacts to people financially, timelines, and I'm talking about just the individuals. I'm not talking about the people who are even doing this as a business, right? As a developer, I'm talking about the homeowner who, pays an architect and, wants to build their new home. So I'm very sympathetic to that, and I think that's why collectively as a council, we agree to consider a moratorium, but only for a very short duration. And so I think it warrants further exploration. To Councilmember McDonald's point, I thought it was very aptly stated. We're not just looking to drop a hammer. We're also looking at some other tools that we might be able to accommodate. I'm going to say like water credits, right? When you, with permeable pavers and coming up with other things so it doesn't require a variance if you happen to go over a certain number, and understanding that if we're more restrictive in some areas, we may need to be a little less restrictive in others. And so finding that balance, and that's what this moratorium is for, is to be able to figure that out. It's not tough because it takes us a long time generally just to agree on things. But I think we, at least at the end of 90 days, know if we're headed in the right direction or not. So that takes us to the action that we have this evening. So we need 2 items.
Yes, Madam Mayor, you will need to ask for 2 votes. And I just want everyone to be clear, this is something that's required under our charter. This ordinance is set up as an emergency ordinance, which means it could have immediate effect, will have immediate effect, as we don't have the 2 readings that we normally do. But the charter requires you to vote separately on the preamble declaring and defining the emergency.
Okay.
So my recommendation would be first to ask for a motion to adopt the preamble of Ordinance 842, defining and declaring the emergency. If you do not have 4 affirmative votes for that, Madam Mayor, we can then discuss how we can turn this into an ordinary ordinance, which would have 2 readings. You basically ask for a motion to adopt the first reading of this ordinance. We'll have to make some change to the language, remove the word emergency, remove the preamble, and we'll need to talk about making it effective at the end of, well, actually, we won't need to make it effective at the end of business tomorrow because it won't be effective for 2 weeks,
And so,
two cycles.
question procedurally with that. If the emergency declaration does not pass, then it becomes part of our regular ordinance, so to speak.
Yes, we could do that.
Okay. Still in effect for 90 days.
It would be the moratorium would begin upon passage, which would require the second reading.
Okay.
So in other words, the 90-day moratorium would take effect after the next council meeting if this is approved by a majority of council, the second reading.
So then, further question procedurally. Public hearing?
No.
No, we don't. So we don't need a public hearing for
Not for a
first
moratorium.
reading or second reading?
No.
Okay. Right. Very good. And it's posted, so there's no issue with that either.
And Madam Mayor, just quick clarification. Would the interim ordinance be in effect upon the second reading or upon publication?
Upon publication.
Okay, so it'd probably be early November when it would start.
Got it.
So not to belabor the point, but one way for council to think about this is if you pass the moratorium, there will be a 90-day moratorium. It'll either start the end of business tomorrow, or it'll start sometime in November. So, I've heard council wrestle with several different aspects of this. One is, well, we've got some applications in the pipeline now. What about them? And I've also heard, well, let's do this quickly and get it over with. So, things to weigh.
Yes,
So
Councilmember.
I've got a couple of questions that brings up. One is, I already know that if we're going to pass an emergency moratorium, we need all 4 of us. If that doesn't pass, do we only require 3 votes positive for the second? Okay. And the other is that we're going to, if it passes that, 4 or 3, if it passes either one, there will be a moratorium. So for some period of time, there will be a moratorium on development. If we don't pass the emergency, then that gives developers, homeowners, property owners 30 days or whatever time it takes to squeeze in something before the moratorium takes effect and get done possibly what we don't want to have happen, only because they know that they have a short amount of time to get it in. Is that a possibility?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Plekish, it's possible that if some property owners are waiting to submit plans for whatever reason, that we might get a couple extra, given, they don't want to be on pause for 90 days. But we're not going to be able to go any faster in our review, but we may get more submitted. So we'll do the best we can, but we're not going to be able to stop everything else and focus on reviewing single-family homes in that neighborhood just to get them through. We won't be doing that. We'll be business as usual.
And City Manager, I'll note our standard single-family home permit review time at minimum is usually like 6 weeks. So that would definitely fall outside of, whenever the effective date of this would be, even if it were second reading plus publication time.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
So, Madam Mayor, if you want to proceed,
Yeah.
as we outlined earlier, I think the first order of business would be asking for a motion to adopt the preamble of Ordinance 842, defining and declaring the emergency.
And do we need to read out the preamble?
I don't think you need to, it's in the packet, it's in front of you now on the screens.
Very good. Would someone care to make that motion?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion in the words that the city attorney used.
Very good. Thank you. And a second.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded. Why don't we do a roll call vote?
Councilmember McDonald,
Aye.
Councilmember Plekish,
Aye.
Councilmember Sorensen,
Nay.
Mayor Mouton.
Aye. Okay, so the motion does not pass.
That's right, Madam Mayor. So now, if council wishes to proceed with this as a regular ordinance, that would become effective after 2 readings and publication. I can give you some quick edits to the ordinance 842 that's in your packet. You would excise the word emergency from the title, would remove the preamble, and would make the effective date and duration, the last section of the ordinance. The ordinance shall become effective upon passage and publication.
Did you guys get that?
I went rather fast. I can talk more about any
okay.
of those things.
All right, so we need a motion to adopt a draft ordinance? No,
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I can give that to you if you'd like.
perfect,
Yeah,
yes, thank
so
you.
the motion I would suggest would be a motion to adopt the first reading of ordinance number 842 with edits to remove references to it being an emergency ordinance, including the preamble, and that it would become effective upon passage and publication.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Someone care to make that motion?
I'll make that motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question of staff. I mean, I will be voting in favor of this, but by virtue of us now extending the beginning of a moratorium for however long that gives us, say 2 months, does that give staff a longer lead time to research this, knowing that another 90 days will come thereafter? Or does it not matter?
Councilmember Plekish, Madam Mayor, I would say it matters because it does give us a longer time in order to meet that deadline of getting something to the council before those 90 days are expired. And who knows what's going to come out of the discussion, the workshop, the community feedback, and just to have a little bit more time for that and to give the best product back to the council, I think is important. So it will help.
So if I can rephrase it in my words, is there is a silver lining to the fact that my vote in the last one didn't prevail, which is that it will give us more time to come up with a better solution at the end of this.
Yes, Councilmember Plekish, I agree. And because of our timeline and how we process permits, I mean, the homes that we get building permits for and applications, they're very complicated, they're custom, so it does take some time. Given that, I don't think we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have new building permit applications that are going to be permitted in this little kind of gap between now and when the interim ordinance is published. So I think we're in good shape.
So let's talk time frame just a little bit. let's play this out. So we've got, assuming we're in discussion now, we've got a motion, first and seconded, we're in the discussion point. So we, assuming this passes, first reading, second reading in 2 weeks?
Yep, 22nd.
Then we publish it after that? That would be approximately what?
November 5th, probably.
Okay, so right around election time, we've got the publication. It goes into effect after publication?
Yep.
Okay, and then the 90-day clock starts from that point. So we're talking December, January, February, heck, we're almost into spring at that point.
Yeah, early February. Hopefully it feels like spring at that point.
Pardon me?
Hopefully it feels like spring at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's better than January.
Right.
For-
And that allows us to get over the hump of the holidays too, when people might be out of town.
Right, okay.
So,
Yes.
a couple things. So I think the silver lining just went to 4 months instead of 3, but what if after 90 days, this hasn't played out yet? What if it hasn't made its way through planning commission and then approved by city council? What if it takes longer than 90 days?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, council members, so the moratorium will expire after 90 days from the effective date. Council will have the opportunity to extend it, or the option, I should say, to extend it. That does, I believe, require a public hearing, so it will be more involved than this initial moratorium, but moratoriums can be extended. The other option is to let it lapse and hopefully be, close enough to the finish line that any official controls that we want to change would be changed in due course.
Thank you.
I think the point we were trying to, we were trying to impart a sense of urgency, right? That we aren't going to study and restudy, and we're just take a look at a few very concise issues, come back with some recommendations, and make a decision. Okay, so we have a motion on the table. It's been first and seconded. We've had some discussion. Let's go ahead and take a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McDonald?
Aye.
Councilmember Pleckish?
Aye.
Councilmember Sorensen?
Nay.
Mayor Mouton?
Aye. Motion passes. And we will move on to the next item under new business, and that is to consider approval of first reading of ordinance 841 to add short-term rentals to Chapter 815 rental dwelling licenses. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be walking you through this item. Just to get a little bit of background on this item in context of our current circumstances, we have about 18 short-term rental properties that we know of in town that have been active over the past year. There's probably more than that, but those are the ones that we at least know about. We discussed this when I first started here, I think in 2016 or 17. Short-term rentals as an issue. Did we want to add to our ordinance to regulate them? At the time, we said, let's not, there weren't too many problems associated with it, so why were we trying to create a solution to a problem that didn't need to be solved? Fast forward, we have had more of them, more short-term rentals over the past few years, especially in a few neighborhoods, and we've gotten some complaints from neighbors about them. So that was mentioned as a part of our strategic plan, especially in terms of our strategic initiative of kind of maintaining the small town character and making sure our neighborhoods retain their integrity and are safe. So this was an initiative between now and the next year. Fast forward from our strategic plan when that was approved to just recently, this past summer, we held a workshop and just wrapped our hands around the entire issue with the current circumstances, what the alternatives are, what other cities do, And ultimately, the council provided direction to staff to kind of, because this is a significant issue, to break it up into 2 phases. First phase, which is, the action item tonight, is to, I would say the most simple phase is just to update the ordinance to include short-term rental, define short-term rentals in our ordinance, and mandate that they are licensed. And if they're licensed, that means that they will have an inspection and have to adhere to whatever regulations that we deem appropriate. So that's the first phase. The second phase, as you see there, which would start next year, would be to do a lot more engagement and really get into the details of zoning, method, means, and manner of do we want to have restrictions in certain areas? Do we want to have property owners present? Look at some of the other cities that are similar to us, and really dive deep into the details of where, essentially, and how many do we feel comfortable with. That's going to be an interesting process that will require a lot of engagement, because often in this, with this case, property owners may have, of short-term rentals, may have a lot of differing opinions on it than our residents that are wanting to live in a peaceful and quiet neighborhood. So that's phase 2, that's next year. What you have in front of you tonight is a draft ordinance that really allows for short-term rentals to be a part of the licensing process, as our longer-term rentals are now, with a couple of exceptions. One, as you see on the screen there, owners of short-term rentals are not required to conduct criminal background checks on prospective tenants like they would for a long-term rental. And then in addition to that, leases or rental agreements with short-term rental tenants will not be required to contain crime-free or drug-free and disorderly conduct language. You may ask why would we disallow this? The quick answer, without going into more detail, is this: we're treating short-term rentals more like a lodging facility, where these types of questions or these types of restrictions you wouldn't have in a hotel or a resort or something like this. This would make it less of a burdensome process for tenants to stay in the facility, with knowing that we have kept in the clause that the property owners of a short-term rental do have to take that crime-free, drug-free training that's required for our long-term rental owners. So that's what we have. That's what you have in front of you tonight. I'm here to answer any questions that you have. This has been a really collaborative process between myself, City Attorney Schelzel, Chief Schultz, and Mr. Zwaber from WSB too. So we're happy to answer any questions. You can see the next steps here. Whatever form of this draft ordinance we move forward with, hopefully tonight, next steps are we'll incorporate it into our fee schedule. You'll see that in a future meeting. We'll develop an actual application or tweak the current application that we have. And then we'd start to get the word out to the community, and then move forward with step 2 or phase 2 next year. I'll leave it at that, and happy to answer questions or lean on my colleagues here for responses as well.
Great, thank you. Questions of staff? No? I do have a couple of questions. So the crime-free, drug-free, nuisance-free language. So we don't could you go back to what is and isn't required? Crime-free, drug-free, disorderly conduct language. So leases or rental agreements will not be required to contain that. Don't we have that backwards? So we're going to have the property owner take the class, but it's not going to be part of the lessee's agreement to rent the place?
Correct, yep. Similar to, anybody checking out a hotel room, you don't have to go through a background check or anything like that.
Does the hotel staff have to go through the crime-free, drug-free, and disorderly conduct class?
No, but the staff isn't owning the property. We feel like it makes sense for the property owner to do that if they're going to own and really, manage the single-family home or the mother-in-law apartment that they're going to rent out.
But what are they going to, so help me understand the class, right? Because the class is tough to come by. It's not offered often. It's not offered everywhere. Sometimes it's at great distance in order to get the license, right? You can get a provisional license until you take the class, so on and so forth. But what is that class teaching you that someone, I mean, now you don't even have to be present to open the door and let somebody in. You can have a code on a doorknob. So what are we expecting that class to teach someone who is renting their home for a weekend that they would be able to enforce, I guess is my point.
Yeah,
Because
good.
I agree, we want safe lodging, regardless of whether it's for one night or if it's for 10 years. But it has to make sense.
Great question. I'm happy to relay a little bit more detail about that specific training session, and then I think Chief Schultz can probably better answer some of those concerns just generally. But the training session really looks into how property owners, what they can do to prevent crime in general, and then also working with the police, who to call, who to contact, what the standards, rules, regulations are. They talk about crime prevention through environment design principles, acronym known as CEPTED, that involves like, where should you have lighting outside? So it's not, so it's not a risk for folks to gather, next to another property or whatnot. Talk about lease agreements, how those should be developed and how to evict. And then applicant screening and fair housing. So really, I would say proactive and preventative measures to make sure that we keep, essentially the bad people out of the
But we
Airbnb.
don't know that. So here's my problem with this. I'm someone who's interested in coming to Wayzata. I go on a website. I found a home that I want to rent for the weekend with my family. I put in my dates. I like the price. I give my credit card information. I never meet the owner. So all of those classes, while they make sense if I live down the street and I rent my house for a long period of time, I'm not even going to be able to do anything. I'm not going to be able to screen anybody. The last 2 points that were just made are screening your tenants. They're not screening anybody. Nobody's screening anybody. Someone's they're entering into a contract over a website. So I guess in theory, that class makes sense, but for a short-term rental, I don't see the nexus between what I'm learning in that class and being able to be a good property owner for a weekend rental or a one-night rental.
Madam Mayor, I'd say there still is screening that can be learned and takeaways from this type of training that could be in how the property owner ultimately leases out their space. Security deposits, for example, very clear rules and what happens if you don't follow the rules, things like that. But to your point, the ordinance as it's written doesn't allow for that type of extensive background for the actual renters. But I don't know, Chief Schultz, if you had anything to add on kind of best practices and what other communities are doing or anything else.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Council, I think, the crime-free drug-free disorderly conduct nuisance ordinance that you're referring to, and the state's certainly been a part of establishing that. That is geared more toward the long-term rental, where the apartment, the landlord is essentially signing a longer lease. They are susceptible to eviction restrictions and need some sort of empowerment to enforce their rules and regulations. We as a police department, any local jurisdiction, police department would work with those places, those establishments, those locations, and offer that training, whether it's through us or through the state video or those different types of options. And it also focuses on recognizing certain issues. Many of them City Manager Dahl illustrated, but such as trafficking, signs of trafficking, signs of illicit drug use. And then, excuse me, also like ways to do background checks without, of course, we require a background check for those long-term rentals. Our ordinance does, Chapter 815, but short-term rentals may be able to be empowered by something similar to that, maybe not quite that crime-free, drug-free, multi-housing class, but something similar with, where is this person coming from? Are they coming from Plymouth? And if so, why are they looking at renting a short-term rental one city away? Well, history has shown that it's usually parties, it's usually things like that. And then we can also offer them tools to, I see us moving, past maybe further past the long-term crime-free, drug-free, multi-housing sessions by teaching them about opportunities to use decibel readers in their home to determine, if they've got two people that are renting a three-bedroom home and that their lease states that you can only have those two people if that's what you're renting it for. If the decibel levels rise louder than that, we can then deem that a party and come in and mitigate that. A lot of cities do that. So I look at what we would offer them, not exactly a crime-free, drug-free ordinance, disorderly conduct ordinance, that we would have them watch the exact same video that the long-term rentals do, but gear it more towards an educational process of, you have a short-term rental, these are the things to look for, to keep your tenants safe and to keep your property safe, but also to abide by our regulations. And then, phase 2 may incorporate a process where we, hold the lease, the landlords responsible if we get X number of violations within, let's say, a 12-month period. The crime-free, drug-free ordinance does that with long-term rentals right now. And then it also empowers the landlord to be able to enact those termination processes if they get those complaints.
So the videos are, I was going to go through the process, but there was, I think, like you could go to Brooklyn Park or you could go up to Blaine. I mean, it was not exactly next door, and it was a full day. Which is tough also for people who have to work. Do we offer other solutions like online where you can take the class now that maybe wasn't offered a year or two ago?
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Our department has a crime-free multi-housing coordinator. I am not that person. I'm not as educated in the process, but Officer Vogel is. And he actually goes out to the establishments and has discussions with the management and walks them through the process and does the site surveys with, environmental security concerns, things like that. We could, in the future, fashion a more intimate interaction with the homeowners that are choosing to be short-term rental landlords in that fashion.
I think that would be great. I would be supportive of something like that we have a more concentrated effort, and guidance. It's about guidance and education more than anything.
And part of this first phase, Madam Mayor, is really just to understand kind of how many do we have and what are the kind of issues that we can see. So anything that we do now doesn't preclude us from enhancing the program and the ordinance and the restrictions down the road.
Yeah. Yes, City Attorney.
Madam Mayor, I do have a thought. So, Section 81505, which is on page 119 of the packet, is the provision that requires the crime-free, drug-free training. And the language does say that every owner or property manager of a rental dwelling, and no carve-out for other than short-term rentals, must attend Phase 1 crime-free training or similar city-approved program. So I think it kind of contemplates what Chief Schultz is talking about, that if we do develop a city-approved program, or we can identify one that's more appropriate for short-term rental property owners, the ordinance would allow us, I think, to accept that. I mean, that would probably be something we'd want to set by policy. But I just would point that out, that the way it's worded now, we would have that flexibility.
Okay, okay. Excellent. Other questions or concerns? No? No? All right. Thoughts of the council? Thank you, Chief.
Madam Mayor, I guess I'll start here. I'm glad we're doing this. I think it's something we need, and I'm generally in favor of this. The only thing that I have an issue with is the exemption of a short-term renter or lessee language for crime-free, drug-free. Those are behaviors that we don't want in our community, whether they're homeowners or hotel residents or long-term lessors. We don't want that behavior. I don't see why we can't require that it be included on these. I mean, check into a hotel, to me, checking into a hotel is not quite the same as renting a house for a week or two. They're just not the same. And a lot of times we sign forms that have all these legal disclaimers on it, and most people just skip over it and sign it anyway. And maybe that's what the realm would be here too, but I see no reason why we shouldn't put these in the lease agreements. I don't see any downside for doing that, other than reinforcing the fact we don't want this behavior. So with that one change, I would be supportive of the rest of the motion here.
Very good, thank you. Just a clarifying question. The language would not, it says it would not be included in the lease. Okay.
Mayor, could I add, excuse me, something we talked about internally of why we did not include that, and that's because often these leases are signed through VRBO or Airbnb or one of these other ones, and are, it's a pretty standard interaction trying to add Wayzata specific language to that
Yep.
third-party business would be pretty tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mayor, while this topic is up, I think the back and forth on this has confused me a little bit. They're required to take the class, but yet the language isn't in the agreement that you would learn from the class? How are those two things connected, I guess?
Well, so my understanding is the lease, right? So if you were to come and lease a room from me in my condo, my lease does not have to include that, that language, that crime-free, drug-free, disorderly conduct language. But it's predominantly because if you're going through a third party like a VRBO or an Airbnb, there is no lease that you can amend to your personal circumstances in the city of Wayzata.
Okay, so they're not dependent on each other, the class and the language. Okay, I think I'm back to understanding, and I just thought you should know, I think there's a public comment.
Yes.
I did know that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on.
So this is true for any short-term rental then? Even if it's somebody who's renting out their basement for less than 30 days?
Yes,
Their agreement?
it's how it's defined in the ordinance, and I don't have that right in front of me, but.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, so any short-term rental lease would not be required to have the same crime-free, drug-free, and disorderly conduct language that any lease for more than 30 days would be required to have.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Casey Shermack. Evening again.
Council member and members and staff, Casey Shermack at 231 Manitoba. I'm 2 for 2 tonight on topics, so pretty excited about that. I am and have taken this class and have been a licensed owner of rentals in Wayzata for probably 30 years now, or however long it was, and I am in favor of it. I think the end game and the details you're talking about, just from my feedback, are important, but more importantly, I think the city needs a list of where the rentals are that are short-term. This will engage that so that you have to register your rental. Now, the details on the finish line can be worked out over time. And yes, you do take this, and it's very difficult to incorporate. But what you learn at this class is important. I went with open eyes, but I learned more than I signed up for. I thought it was very intriguing and causes an open eye to some things that maybe you weren't looking for before. So I think the class is very good. Airbnb and VRBO, they have embedded in their things you sign online that you can't be a drug dealer, you can't do violent things, you can't be a troublemaker and all that stuff, because you can be kicked off the venue and not used, and you will be not permitted to use that venue anymore to lease and to rent out homes. So there is a self-governing thing embedded in Airbnb and VRBO, which was stated by staff. It's already there as far as the fluidity of it, and it does work, just so you know. So the other thing that I think is important by triggering this, at least starting to registration license process, are the inspections. People should not be staying in these homes unless they've been inspected. There's proper handrails, the steps fit right, the grades are proper, there's smoke detectors, appliances don't leak gas. I mean, I could list them off for you and the staff here would need to know that that's coming. But if you list them off, it'd be good to know that there's 30 of them, and that of the 30, maybe half of them are already being inspected because they're part of what either the long-term rentals are going to be going into short-term, because you can kind of bounce them around depending on how you want to do it as a landowner. But just so you know, the list and the availability of knowing where they are and what they are is as important as the details at the finish line. So I am in favor of the licensing and the permitting to get it started so that staff knows when there's a complaint to the police department, oh yeah, that's one of the houses, and if it's not, it should send up a really big red flag immediately for the city. So thank you for allowing me to go 2 for 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. All right.
Yeah, if I can then expound on what I was saying before. First off, thank you, Mr. Shermack, for that, because that actually addresses a question I had, or pushback on the staff, which was the reason I heard that you didn't include this was for ease of implementing an Airbnb or VRBO contract, which he just said that language is already in there. But there will be places here perhaps that are not part of that network, so why wouldn't we want to include that language? So I'm going to go back and say I will insist that we have that language in these leases, which we don't have to do much because VRB already has them in there, but for those that are not part of that network, we put that in. So I am going to insist that those actually be included in the leases. With the rest of it, I'm fine.
Madam Mayor and City Attorney Shelzel, is that something that we can refine tonight and kind of meet the intent of what Councilmember Pluckish is saying, where as long as the property has those safety nets, I don't know what the language needs to be, but I don't think we're too far away, but the devil's in the details.
Madam Mayor and City Manager, yeah, I would be reluctant to try and make that tweak on the fly for a couple reasons. I think, in essence, I agree with the public comment we heard about Airbnb and VRBO having terms that are similar, but I don't know that they're all the same. If we say that these particular terms with these words have to be in it and there's any discrepancy, or Airbnb and VRBO can update their terms from time to time, what if one of these disappears? I'd need to think through all of that to make sure it was okay. The second thing is, I'm not sure that every short-term rental has a formal lease agreement, an agreement in writing. I think sometimes those arrangements are done without a written lease. And that would create another issue if we impose this. Does that make them have to have a written lease? So those are just two thoughts, but both of them lead me to conclude that I think if you wanted to make a change to that, I'm not sure I'd be prepared to do that tonight on the fly.
So we'd bring it back at a future council meeting after we did.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we could do it at a future council meeting, or it could be a part of phase 2 if we wanted to get something on the books today, and discuss that and other, significant amendments down the road.
So what, in effect, would we be passing today if not?
The ordinance as it's drafted in your packet, which would essentially, commence the registration and inspection of short-term rentals as it is defined in the draft. It would, as it is in the packet, it would leave out the drug-free, crime-free language for the leasee
Okay.
So,
and the training. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Madam Mayor, so we could vote on this the way it is, and it requires how many to pass? 3?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so a few more comments?
Yes, please.
So just a bit of a side comment, but I've also heard from other landlords who were skeptics of taking this class, that they were appreciative of the class, and they learned more than they thought they might. So to hear a couple of people confirm that, I think is a very positive thing. I also had a little bit of concern about not including this crime-free, drug-free, and disorderly conduct language in the lease. And I understand Councilman Pleshik where you're coming from. Conceptually, I agree, but I think practically it's just not practical. I mean, these leases and terms and conditions exist now, and for one city to come and try to alter that, I think is just not practical. So I got comfortable with the way it's written now. This has always been a high priority for me, is the kind of issue of the short-term rentals. I think there is a concern among our citizens of kind of altering neighborhood character, so I'm glad we're addressing it. I think this ordinance is appropriate, and look forward to moving on to phase 2 where we can address additional regulations.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to express my support for this first reading of ordinance 841. I think it's important to start counting these and be able to identify which ones are out there, and also just have a more informed decision if we're going to be, fixing a problem that actually exists, or if not. So,
Very good, thank you. Okay, well, I too am in favor of this. I think it's important. I want to make sure that that the city eliminates any barriers to taking the class as possible. So I don't know if we can find one that's online, or, it felt very antiquated when I was learning. I had to drive across town, sit in a classroom all day for 8 hours, and I didn't end up doing it because I never rented my place. But I thought, wow, I would hope that we would have a different option available to folks. But I think this is good. This is a good first step. There's more to look at. And so I'm glad that we're at the point where we are. So we have a proposed motion in front of us. Someone care to make that? And that is to approve the first reading of ordinance 841, adding short-term rentals to chapter 815, rental dwelling licenses.
so moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. In a second?
Second?
It's been first and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I am going to be voting in favor of this. I'm not opposed to this at all. And even though I was insisting that we add the language, I just might like to make the note that we can look at that specific thing for phase 2. And I wasn't suggesting, and I don't think it's even in here, that a specific language be included, so that would have to mirror what is in VRBO or Airbnb, rather that the concept of that be included. It doesn't matter to me how the words are, and it could be different between the two. As long as it's included, then I'm okay with that. But I'm not going to hang up on voting. This is not a hill to die on. So with that caveat, I will be voting in favor of this.
All right, very good, thank you. Okay, we have a motion that's been first and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And we will move on now to our consent agenda item D that was pulled for further discussion. That is approval of the local climate action grant agreement with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy to answer any questions that the council has here. This grant is a result of a application that the council supported earlier this year. It's consistent with the work plan of the Energy and Environment Committee, and ultimately will be just focused on city operations to ultimately get to a point where we can further reduce our carbon footprint and be a better partner with Mother Nature. And it'll have some recommendations associated with that, and that will ultimately come back to the council for review. So happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Very good, thank you. Councilmember Fleckish.
Yeah, I wanted to pull this because I just want to clarify some things. I may not vote for this. I may not vote in favor of it, but I may too. So when we applied for the grant, it is my understanding that we had a general idea of what this money would be used for, but we didn't know specifically what it would be used for until we got it back with the stipulations in the project. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. And there are a couple of items that the MPCA sent back to us that I really am skeptical about. Most of these are fine. It's city-oriented. But the ones that I'm skeptical about are analyze greenhouse gas data and identify strategies for resilience, adaptation, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction, which sounds like it's part of a much larger agenda, and it would be pushing us toward a mandate to do certain things we may not want to do, we may not be capable of doing, we may not have the budget to do. And yet what comes out of this, we're pretty much mandated to do, is the way I read this. And if we don't, there are a number of stipulations here that says they can pull the funding. And even though most of the funding would come from them, if they pull the funding, we're on the hook for it. This is not something we have to do. It's something we applied for, but I don't like the details of what came back. Unless I'm convinced otherwise, I'm going to vote against it because we don't have to do this.
Can we point to the language where, in the grant agreement, that is concerning, please?
You asking me?
Yes.
Okay, on page 44, there's a section called termination, and under there, it's got a variety of different ways that the state can terminate and put us on the hook. There's termination by the state without cause. That means they can just come in and say, okay, we don't like what you're doing. There is termination with cause, and there's termination by the Commissioner of Administration. So again, if you read through this carefully, it sure looks to me like this is part of a global agenda with which I don't agree. And so if the city ends up not doing this precisely as they would like, or if we acquiesce to things, then they can terminate, and then we're on the hook for the money. Again, this is not something we have to do. We just applied for it. Now we know what we're going to be required to do, and I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, thank you. City Manager.
I was just going to say, Madam Mayor, I know that this contract was reviewed by the city attorney, and to me, this all seems fairly straightforward in what type of termination clauses are in most of these types of agreements. That without cause is based on if the state runs out of money, like they're not obligated to fund the project, which we wouldn't then do. And then with cause, there's language here that the state finds that there has been a failure to comply with the provisions of this grant contract. It's really about the grant contract, which is putting together the plan, which is not the implementation of the plan. So I just want to make that very clear, and I don't know, City Attorney Shells, if you had anything else to add there.
Yeah, City Manager and Mayor and Councilmember Plekish, I would agree with what the City Manager just related. If the state contracts terminates the contract and the funding goes away, we can stop. They're obligated to pay us for services that have been performed. I guess the question I would have for Councilmember Plekish, just so I'm on the same page, is the concern subtask 2C analyze greenhouse gas data that you saw there?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this will give you comfort or not, but the way I read that is all that the city is obligated to do is complete an inventory and analyze that data and provide a draft summary. Doesn't obligate the city to sign on to any larger plan or do anything that addresses it. It's just basically an inventory and analysis. So I don't know if that gives you comfort or not, but that's the way I read subtask 2C.
I'll still say I think it's part of a larger agenda with which I don't agree. And there is one sentence in here in recitals where it says the state is in need of the Wayzata City Operations Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Plan project. My question is why? Why do they need us to do this? They don't. So the whole thing just doesn't feel right to me. I don't think it's something we need to do. So I will vote against it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other thoughts or comments on this item from the council? No? Okay. Then would someone care to make a motion to approve the local climate action grant agreement with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. All right. And then last up this evening is the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple quick things. One, just wanted to thank our fire department, our police department, and everybody who came out, our public works department that came out yesterday for our city showcase from 4 to 6. Beautiful weather, hundreds of people there, a lot of kids. It was great to see them all around getting demos from all of our cool equipment, our big trucks, a couple demonstrations by both fire and police. Our canines were out there. It was just a great evening, and I really appreciate not only the city staff and volunteers that puts a lot of time and energy into it. Deputy Chief Baker over there, I know she spent many hours making sure it all happened. And then just the community for coming out too, because they really did come out. I think we ran out of hot dogs once again. And then two other events coming up that I just want to reiterate and inform the community about. One is the American Legion is throwing a chicken dinner fundraiser for the Wayzata Fire Relief Association. That's Friday, October 11th, so this Friday from 5:30 to 8 p.m. They do chicken well over there, so I'd encourage everybody to go down there and get some. And if you want to donate a little extra more to the Fire Relief Association, that's cool too. Also, Pullet Day is coming. That's October 17th. That's Saturday. 8:30 a.m. We meet at the Panaway Plaza now. We rally the troops. We've got donuts, coffee. And then our public works staff brings out community members to different planting locations throughout the city. And we pull all the flowers, we pull all the perennials, and no, I always get the perennials and annuals. We pull the annuals because we'd have to do that annually, so I should remember that. And really save, it's a fun task because you get to let out some aggression, but you really help the city and help our public works staff. We've got a lot of really nicely kept areas in town, and by and large, they're kept nicely because of the community members. And this is kind of it's bittersweet because it means cold weather's coming, but it's a fun event. So I'd encourage you if you're listening or watching or interested in meeting some more neighbors and providing some value, go down to the Panaway Plaza at 8:30 a.m. on October 17th. That's all I have. Thank you.
Fantastic.
October 17th?
Yes, is that a Saturday? Should be a Saturday. So that's the 19th. I'm
The
sorry.
19th. Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
My bad. October 19th. Saturday. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else from the council? No? And how about a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Mayor?
Thank you. In a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.